In this video, we're going to discuss just the concept without examples. I'll do that in a different video, but the concept of creating these new functions out of old functions via arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. So the first thing we have to do is assume we're given two functions. Let's call them f and g, could be any names. Then we can define new functions as follows. So the first function that we will create will look like this: f plus g of x. Okay? And so the meaning of this is x is the input to the f plus g function. So f plus g is the name of this function, and x is the input. So it's very much like if I write h of x. X would be the input to the h function, except now the name of the function is f plus g. Okay? So how can I describe what the output of this function looks like? Well, the output of the f plus g of x function looks like this. What you do is you take the input x, whatever it may be, that's input to the original function, and you input it to the f function. So you have f of x. So you take the x and input it to f. You also take the same x and input it to g. And then you calculate those outputs. F of x means the output of f. G of x means the output of g. And you then add those outputs together. Okay? So by definition, this new function is defined to be f of x plus g of x. And the thing about this is we can calculate these. We can calculate these outputs since we're given the f and g functions. Those are given to us. Okay? So let me show you a diagram of maybe what this means. So here's what we have. We'll think of this like a machine. So this is our machine, or our function, f plus g, this box, okay? Something comes into this box and something comes out of this box, all right? So what comes in is your input, x, whatever it may be. Let's call it x. So if x comes in, what comes out? Well, f plus g of x. Or, if you want to describe it this way, f of x plus g of x. Now let's look at the inner makings of this machine. What happens inside this machine? How does this machine turn x into this stuff? Well, here's what happens. X comes in and it's fed to two different routes. X is fed into the F machine that we know. F is given. It is also simultaneously fed into the G machine. So I split my input and give it to each of these machines. And what comes out of the F machine if X comes in? Well, F of X comes out. And what comes out of the G machine if X comes in? Well, G of X comes out of those. And then what happens is both of those are fed to the adding machine. So the adding machine takes the two inputs and adds them together and outputs f plus g of x, or f of x plus g of x. So the key to this is the makings of f and g, because that's what happens. The adding machine is because it's a plus machine. So you can imagine this could be subtraction, multiplication, or division, and that's exactly what I'm going to describe for you now. So now I'm going to summarize the four different functions we can create. We can create f plus g of x. We can create f minus g of x. We can create f times g of x. which is also written as sometimes just fg of x for multiplication. And finally, we can have f over g of x, which is sometimes written like this. And you can imagine probably how each of these are defined. The first one is, as we said before, you feed x to the f machine, you feed x to the g machine, so the input is the same. The input is the same to every function here, so that's important. So I'll highlight that in yellow, and I'll illustrate here what I mean. X is the input to the f plus g machine, x is the input to the f machine, and x is the input to the g machine, and then each of those calculates their own outputs. And then, so you feed x to f, you feed x to g, and then because this is a plus, you add those two outputs together, okay? So similarly here, you feed x to the f machine, you feed x to the g machine, and then you subtract those two outputs. You feed x to the f machine, you feed x to the g machine, and then you multiply the two outputs. And finally, you feed x to the f machine, you feed x to the g machine, and then you divide the two outputs. Okay, so that's how these functions are defined. Now there's one last thing I want to mention. F times g looks similar to something that you might see elsewhere, which looks like this. It looks like fog of x. This fog of x is not the same thing as multiplication. So don't get those confused. I've got other videos discussing this. It is called composition. This video is not to discuss composition, however. So this is not the same thing as f circle g. Okay, so that's the concept of combining two given functions using arithmetic, addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division.